What are we going to talk about, George?
Well, we're going to talk about one of the first Europeans that we know of, Cabeza de Vaca, who ends up on Galveston Island. Now, Cabeza de Vaca, who is he and when is he? So let's go back to the time of the Spanish conquistador explorers. So think about this, 1492, Columbus lands in the Caribbean. This is only about 30 years later, 30 some years later. So think of this, if we were in present time, we're looking back to the disco era. It's not that big a gap of time. So the Spanish are in Cuba, Santo Domingo. Cortez has landed in Mexico. They've discovered gold. This is a time of vast Spanish Empire extension. We call them explorers sometimes, but really they are people that are looking for riches, wealth, land, slaves, gold. Here's where Cabeza de Vaca comes in. There is an expedition called the Narvaez expedition. Several hundred people. They're going to go north into Florida and look for wealth, look for riches, all these rumors of gold and things. From the beginning, there's problems. A couple of the ships sink. Santo Domingo, a couple hundred of them say, we're not going on, and desert the expedition. So when they do land in Florida, Narvaez, he wants to go inland with a couple hundred guys. So he says, we're going to move inland. The ships will go down the coast, and we'll see you in a month or two down the coast. They go inland, navigation is horrible. The ships actually will stay on station and look for them for about a year before they give it up, and they assume everybody is perished in there. They battle. The Spaniards are not people that will get along with the natives. They battle with them continuously. There's disease, there's warfare among the natives, there's interfighting among themselves. Eventually they realize we are not going, the ships are not coming.
George, thanks for meeting me on the West End. I got a treat for you in this house.
They finally got up around Apalachicola, and they were starting to starve. So they began eating their horses. They killed a horse every day or two and ate the meat. And by the time they had killed the last few horses, they were really desperate. And at that time, one of the Spaniards noted that the current offshore was kind of flowing to the westward. Why don't we build some rafts? Now, we can't use the horses anymore. We certainly don't want to walk all the way to Panuco. They took all the curb chains, the saddle ornaments, their swords, which they wouldn't need anymore, and a few other things. They melted them all down to make axes, saws, adzes, nails, other things that they'd need to build the rafts. They made bellows. They were very ingenious.
This doctor, he made a scale model of the raft.
Yeah, I'm very excited. The professor here has done a lot of research into this model on how many people could fit on it, the size of it, and I'm very excited about this.
The raft is on the coffee table there, and I recently donated it to the Bryan Museum because of their interest in the history of the Southwest. And the Cabeza de Vaca's memoirs specify the size of the raft. Each raft was made of 26 probably pine logs that were about 33 feet long, translating it from the Spanish measurements. And they were lashed together using the hair and tails and manes of the horses that they had killed. They weaved it all together to make rope to lash the logs together. So, and the Cabeza de Vaca also mentioned that each raft had a sail, probably a square sail, something like you see there, and each raft was rowed as well. The sail would help push them with the current in a westward direction when the wind was blowing right, and to stay off the beach so they don't get washed ashore, but within sight of land so they can still navigate. They had to row to keep their aspect of the shore. But Cabeza de Vaca didn't mention how many rowers there were, and I was also curious as to how crowded a raft like that would be, a raft of those dimensions with 50 people aboard. So in order to solve those two problems, I decided to make a scale model of the raft using the exact dimensions. The 5 rafts all made it past the mouth of the Mississippi River, which was in itself quite a trek for a little raft like that. And then a storm hit and they started washing ashore. By this time, the logs had become kind of loose and some of them were starting to break up. One raft got all the way down to St. Joseph Island, or Mustang Island, around that area. Very, very good navigation. And some others got to the Freeport area. Narvaez himself landed just south of Freeport. And when he parked his raft for the night, he let his men go ashore to sleep on the beach. But he was kind of worried if the Indians attacked that maybe he should be ready for a quick getaway. Well, the raft pulled its anchor, and Narvaez and his servant found themselves stranded out in the Gulf of Mexico the next morning. And of course, 2 of them, it was impossible to row the raft, to orient it, and the wind was blowing the wrong way to use the sails, so they were never heard from again. They probably died of thirst or starved to death. The one that Cabeza de Vaca was in charge of got to the western end of Galveston Island, probably around San Luis Pass somewhere, and another raft commanded by 2 captains got through San Luis Pass and washed up on the inshore on the west bay part of the island. They were immediately captured by Indians who treated them nicely at first. They fed them and sympathized with them, but then slowly they began to enslave them. So Cabeza de Vaca and the other survivors spent about 6 years as slaves of the local Indians, both the Carancos and the Atacapas, 2 tribes that were inhabiting that area.
Now I want you to think about this. If you landed on the dark side of the moon, you could not be any further from civilization than Spanish civilization. Their goal was to get to Mexico, a long way from here on a raft. So they literally wash up here on this beach in November naked. So it's cold, there's disease. So out of all those people, eventually only 3 will return to the Spanish in Mexico. Cabeza de Vaca, they're taking slaves by the natives, but he's a little different Spaniard on this sort of thing. Instead of fighting the natives, he learns their languages, he learns their ways, and eventually he becomes one of them. So he will go among tribes. He's known as a faith healer, and he will talk to the person and make the sign of the cross over a sick person. And this is considered very big medicine for the natives. 2 of his companions and him. And essentially they will come out around the Big Bend country and they will run in to some Spaniards who are slave traders. They are armed, on horseback, and they think he's a native, but when he speaks to them in Spanish, it surprises them. Eventually Cabeza de Vaca, he goes back to, he's greeted in Mexico by other Spaniards. Cabeza de Vaca is an educated man. He was treasurer on a Narvaez expedition. So he writes his report down for the King of Spain.
JP,
Yes.
what is this? How did you get it, and why is it important in Texas history?
Well, this artifact, this is Cabeza de Vaca's account of his travels through Texas, or life in Texas, for a period of 7.5 years, in which he landed here on Galveston Island, and then over time was able to find his way back with his 3 followers to Mexico City. And this is the publication. It is the rarest and the first known printing of anybody's experiences or travels in this area we now call Texas.
So how'd you get this?
I located it through a individual who I bought a world of books and documents from. She was doing an appraisal of a collection on a trip to Mexico City for a very wealthy businessman. And she called me and said, Doctor, I won't mention his last name, has a very rare item in his collection he'd like to sell. I said, what is it? He said, it's the Cabeza de Vaca. I said, very nice. And so I said, well, important question, what's he want for it? And the price sounded outrageous at the time. So I said, well, no, I don't think so. And it's just too pricey. So I said, but thank him very much. And if he changes his mind later about the price, I'd like to talk to him. So she called me back and said, okay, the doctor is willing to talk again about the price. And so he said, this is what he'll offer it for. And I said, well, tell him that's too much, but I will counter, and this is what I'll pay him. And she said, oh, he won't accept that. I said, well, just go on and offer it and see what he says. So she called me back and said, well, I don't think he's going to take it. He said he'd think about it. So I said, fine. A month or so went by, and she called me and said, okay, he accepted your deal, your offer. So there you go, there it is.
Now, how would you like to work for that guy, Narvaez? Okay, we're lost now, fellas. The ships are supposed to pick us up, but they're late. So what we're gonna have to do, we're gonna have to kill our horses off, eat them. Everybody, we're gonna have to melt it down, and we're gonna make some nice rafts. Now, it's gonna be a beautiful raft, a nice, big, beautiful raft. And then we're gonna sail from here, follow the coast down to Mexico. Well, hey, what do you say?
Oh, it sounds brilliant, boss. Ah, Cap.
Is this good with our health benefit? Do we get vacation days? They did. I saw Cortez's lower ranking people. You know, after he conquers Mexico and steals everything from the Aztecs and all, he's essentially a billionaire. The local privates, the lower ranking, they would have got about enough money to buy a sword with, you know. So, and if that's not the way it was,
The way it should have been, George.